When I was 19, life seemed to move at a breakneck pace, fueled by a potent cocktail of hormones, newfound independence, and the intoxicating rush of first love. My girlfriend, Dawn, and I had been dating for just over 6 months, our relationship a whirlwind of stolen kisses, late-night phone calls, and the kind of all-consuming passion that only exists in the realm of teenage romance. We were inseparable, two halves of a whole, navigating the treacherous waters of adolescence with intertwined hands and starry-eyed optimism. It was early summer when Dawn had her accident. We'd been out with friends, enjoying the warm evening air and the freedom that came with it. She'd always been a bit of a daredevil, fearless in a way that both thrilled and terrified me. That night, her courage got the better of her. A misjudged jump on her skateboard sent her tumbling to the unforgiving concrete, resulting in a compound fracture of her left leg. The next few days were a blur of hospital visits, worried parents, and the sickening realization of our own mortality. Dawn underwent surgery to repair the damage, emerging from the operating room with a leg encased in plaster and a cocktail of painkillers coursing through her veins. As I sat by her bedside, watching her chest rise and fall in drug-induced sleep, I was struck by how fragile she looked. Gone was the vibrant, unstoppable force of nature I'd fallen in love with, replaced by a pale, vulnerable girl in a hospital gown. Days passed, and Dawn's strength began to return. The fog of medication lifted, revealing glimpses of her usual spirited self. Our visits became longer, filled with hushed conversations and gentle touches. The sterile hospital environment faded into the background as we created our own little bubble of normalcy amidst the beeping machines and antiseptic smell. It was during one of these visits that everything changed. I'd snuck in after school, armed with contraband snacks and a stack of her favorite magazines. Dawn's face lit up when she saw me, her smile chasing away the lingering shadows of pain and boredom. As I settled into the chair beside her bed, I felt the familiar surge of attraction that always accompanied her presence. We chatted quietly, mindful of the elderly gentleman in the next bed, separated from us by nothing more than a thin curtain. I filled Dawn in on the latest high school gossip, described the homework she was missing, and regaled her with tales of my own clumsy attempts to navigate life without her by my side. As we talked, I found myself leaning closer, drawn in by the warmth of her presence and the intoxicating scent of her skin beneath the clinical hospital odors. Looking back, I can't pinpoint the exact moment when our innocent visit took a turn towards the scandalous. Perhaps it was the way Dawn's hospital gown had slipped, revealing a tantalizing glimpse of her collarbone. Maybe it was the heightened emotions of the past few days, the fear and relief mixing together to create a potent brew of desire. Whatever the catalyst, I soon found myself perched on the edge of her bed, our faces mere inches apart. The first kiss was tentative, a gentle brush of lips that felt both familiar and thrillingly new in this forbidden setting. Dawn's fingers tangled in my hair, pulling me closer as the kiss deepened. I was acutely aware of our surroundings, the uncomfortable hospital bed, the steady beep of machines, the ever-present threat of discovery, but those concerns faded into the background as our passion ignited. In our hormone-addled teenage minds, we genuinely believed we were being stealthy. We thought our hushed giggles and muffled moans were imperceptible, that the rustle of sheets and the creak of the bed frame were masked by the ambient noise of the hospital. Looking back, I cringe at our naivety and lack of consideration for others. But in that moment, lost in a haze of desire and youthful recklessness, we were convinced of our own invisibility. As our kissing grew more heated, hands began to wander. I was hyper-aware of every point of contact between us, the softness of Dawn's skin beneath my fingertips, the warmth of her breath against my neck, the gentle pressure of her good leg hooked around my waist. The world narrowed down to just the two of us, everything else fading into insignificance. It was Dawn who escalated things further. With a mischievous glint in her eye that I recognized all too well, she guided my hand beneath her hospital gown. My breath caught in my throat as I encountered bare skin, my mind reeling at the realization that she wasn't wearing anything underneath. The last vestiges of my self-control evaporated, replaced by an all-consuming need to touch, to taste, to lose myself in her completely. What followed was a clumsy, fumbling exploration of each other's bodies, made all the more challenging by Dawn's immobilized leg and the cramped confines of the hospital bed. We were like two overeager puppies, all enthusiasm and no finesse, driven by an instinctual urge that overrode all common sense and decency. I kissed my way down Dawn's body, pushing up her hospital gown as I went. The logical part of my brain screamed at me to stop, to remember where we were and the potential consequences of our actions. But that voice was drowned out by the roaring of blood in my ears and the intoxicating taste of Dawn's skin on my tongue. As I settled between her legs, I spared a brief, guilty thought for the poor man on the other side of the curtain. In that moment, however, even that couldn't deter me from my goal. I set about pleasuring Dawn with all the skill and enthusiasm my limited experience could muster, determined to bring her to the heights of ecstasy despite our less-than-ideal surroundings. Dawn did her best to stay quiet, but small whimpers and gasps escaped her lips as I worked. Her fingers twisted in my hair, guiding me where she wanted me most. I lost myself in the task, my entire world narrowing down to the sounds she made, the taste of her on my tongue, the subtle shifts of her hips beneath my hands. Time seemed to stretch and warp, minutes bleeding into each other as we remained locked in our passionate embrace. I have no idea how long we actually spent in that compromising position, but it felt simultaneously like mere seconds and an eternity. When Dawn finally reached her peak, her whole body tensing before melting into the mattress, I felt a surge of pride and accomplishment that momentarily overshadowed any lingering guilt or embarrassment. As the fog of arousal began to clear, reality came crashing back in. The steady beep of machines, the distant chatter of nurses in the hallway, the antiseptic smell of the hospital, all of it rushed back with startling clarity. I sat up, hastily wiping my mouth and trying to smooth down my disheveled hair. Dawn tugged her hospital gown back into place, her cheeks flushed with a combination of exertion and embarrassment. We exchanged sheepish grins, the gravity of what we'd just done settling over us like a heavy blanket. As the adrenaline faded, I became acutely aware of how exposed we were, how easily we could have been caught. The thin curtain that had seemed like such adequate protection now felt woefully inadequate, and I found myself unable to meet Dawn's eyes as the full extent of our recklessness dawned on me. It was then that I heard it, a soft cough from the other side of the curtain. My blood ran cold as I realized that the elderly gentleman in the next bed was very much awake and almost certainly aware of what had just transpired. The poor man must have heard everything, the rustling of sheets, the muffled moans, the whispered encouragements. I felt a wave of mortification wash over me, my face burning with shame. Dawn and I exchanged panicked looks, silently communicating our shared horror at the situation. We had been so caught up in our own desires that we'd completely forgotten about the other occupant of the room. The realization that we had essentially forced the stranger to be an unwilling audience to our sexual exploits was sobering, to say the least. For a long moment, we sat in tense silence, waiting for some kind of reaction from the other side of the curtain. Would the man call for a nurse? Report us to Dawn's parents? The possibilities raced through my mind, each more horrifying than the last. But as the seconds ticked by and no outcry came, I began to hope that perhaps we had gotten away with our indiscretion. Eventually, the tension became too much to bear. I mumbled some excuse about needing to get home for dinner, pressing a quick kiss to Dawn's forehead before practically fleeing the room. As I hurried down the hospital corridor, my face burning and my heart racing, I couldn't shake the feeling of the elderly man's eyes boring into my back. In the days that followed, Dawn and I barely spoke about what had happened. There was an unspoken agreement between us to pretend it had never occurred, to chalk it up to a moment of youthful indiscretion best left in the past. When Dawn was finally released from the hospital, neither of us mentioned the incident, focusing instead on her recovery and the challenges that lay ahead. As time passed and we grew older, the memory of that day in the hospital began to take on a different quality. What had once been a source of acute embarrassment slowly transformed into a kind of shared secret, a testament to the intensity of our teenage passion and the recklessness of youth. We would occasionally reference it in hushed tones, trading embarrassed giggles and fond eye rolls at our past selves. Now, years later, I look back on that day with a complex mix of emotions. There's still a lingering sense of mortification, a reflexive cringe when I think about our lack of consideration for others and the potential consequences of our actions. But there's also a certain fondness, a wistful nostalgia for a time when love felt all-consuming and consequences seemed distant and unimportant. I often wonder about the elderly gentleman in the next bed. Did he lie there in shocked silence, too embarrassed or stunned to intervene? Did he perhaps smile to himself, remembering his own youthful indiscretions? Or did he simply tune us out, chalking it up to the strange and often uncomfortable realities of hospital life? I'll never know for sure, but I like to think he found it in his heart to forgive two hormone-driven teenagers caught up in the throes of young love. In the end, that day in the hospital serves as a poignant reminder of the intensity and recklessness of youth. It's a memory that still has the power to make me blush, a perfect encapsulation of the heady mix of passion, poor judgment, and sheer audacity that defines the teenage experience. And while I would never condone such behavior now, I can't help but look back on that moment with a mixture of embarrassment and affection, grateful for the reminder of a time when love felt infinite and the world was full of possibilities.